Our first guest has been living and filming in a very remote part of Asia on the Burma-Thailand border. Tim Syrota has been working with people in refugee camps. It's a story that, by and large, the world doesn't get to hear. Tim, morning to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Why did you go to such a remote part of the world?
Originally to facilitate the making of the film that's now being played. I'd shot that film inside Burma, was back in Melbourne for a couple of years, had a book published and so on and so forth, and work here was very busy for over a 2-year period. So there was really no opportunity during that period of time to do the work that I needed to do on the film. It was self-funded. So it seemed to me at the end of that 2 years that the only way that was going to happen was to move to an area which A, would help facilitate getting the work that I required for the film, and B, was going to be sort of affordable to live in for a year without a wage.
Let's go back a step, though. What attracted you to the story that took you there in the first place? Why there?
Okay. Circumstance, I guess. Fortuitous circumstance. I'd been in Burma as a backpacker. I'd written a book about that. That was published. When I was there as a backpacker, I had been working in film for the previous year. So this was going back to 1997. And it was obviously somewhere that I wanted to go back to make a film, despite the fact that I was writing and taking photos at the time. You think, well, this is somewhere I really want to come back and film.
Do you know what I liked? Is that when the DVD arrived at my house of your film Burmese Dreaming, you had a little note in the front that said, "Oh, I'm really, really sorry. I had to go back and remaster this in the refugee camp on the Thai-Burma border. I hope that's okay." How do you do that? How do you remaster a film in a refugee camp?
Laptops. the wonders of modern-day editing suites. If you're set up with it's wonderful. Even when my first time's up there, I was lugging sort of 30 kilos of equipment with me, and now it's a laptop and a few hard drives.
And that's all you need. But what's the story being told? So the film's called Burmese Dreaming. I'll give you some details in a moment of where you can see it. But what's the story of Burmese Dreaming?
The story of Burmese Dreaming, it's more than even being about Burma. It's about looking at an individual or a family's ability in a very difficult situation to A, deal with that situation, and B, see a lightness to it despite the darkness, if you can understand that sort of... It's more humanist than it is specifically about the situation in Burma, although it's set in Burma.
So who are the people who are displaced?
Okay, the person who's displaced, she's a refugee. She's someone I met in the refugee camps on the Thai-Burma border. Very bright woman, now living in America as part of the resettlement program. Her particular story was one in which she was imprisoned when she was 5 by the Burmese military. Now, this is going back 20 years ago. She was imprisoned because they couldn't essentially catch her father, who was a soldier for the Karen National Liberation Army, who has, up until recently, been in armed conflict with the Burmese military. She was imprisoned, and then her story then goes on, and it's really a story of ongoing family breakup. I mean, it's funny, I'm just reading a book about Ned Kelly and his family and the sort of how he had to go away from his family and then he'd come back to his family when he could and then he'd go back to his... and so on and so forth because of what the authorities were doing with regard to oppression of that family. And you see that, I mean, it's hers is a story where she would spend time with her family when she could, but then forces would make her have to move elsewhere. But in between that, you have her talking about her love of football and water buffalo and rainy season and so on and so forth, which is this lighter side of her existence.
There was a part in the film where she talked about, she said, we are outside the world. You know, when we're in this refugee camp, we are outside the world. Does it feel like that when you're in the camp, that you're not a part of a country, you're not a part of the bigger world?
Totally. And I think the most obvious manifestation of that is I guess there are two manifestations which are very obvious. One is for the 18-year-olds, because of NGO, international organisation, involvement in the camps. There's actually a very good education system, or a much better education system in the camps than you would find in most of provincial Burma. Once they finish that cycle of education, there's nothing for them to do. So, I mean, in that sense, you can see very, very distinctly an example of why those people are outside the world. They don't have an opportunity for a job. I mean, they're educated, they're bright, they can't have a job, they can't go outside the camps, can't really do anything. Those people are obviously outside the world. Similarly, for people in their 40s and 50s or whatever who have their families and then they're coming into the refugee camp situation or have lived there for up to 25 years, they can't farm, they don't have fields, and that's the background that they have come from, and there is no opportunity to do that. So what some of the ways that you see this manifest itself are there is a disproportionate number of young men in camp who are good at football and play the guitar.
A lot of soccer.
A lot of soccer.
And Tim, but the scenes, and it's beautifully filmed, and this is a country we see very little about until just recent times. And Zoe Daniel, the ABC's local correspondent, coming out of Bangkok, has done some terrific work going into Thailand, going from Thailand into Burma recently, now that she's allowed to. But the pictures you show us are of a country, it's almost like a snapshot of 50 years ago, where buildings haven't changed, people's homes haven't changed, even the sorts of vehicles and public transport systems and the like. It's like going back in time almost.
Totally. I would agree with that 100%. The economic sanctions on Burma have put a ceiling on what can be done. The gross mismanagement of all funds in Burma to a military elite and to a business elite that's very much aligned with the Burmese military.
So the farming techniques, the
absolutely
farming equipment and the irrigation, everything's like going back 50 years.
No impetus for change. There aren't agricultural colleges. There's no money. It's one of the worst economies in the world, and you don't think of that as an Australian. You think of Southeast Asia as yes, it's got its issues, but you don't think of Burma, say, being worse than Cambodia or as bad or worse than Laos. You have to think of it in terms of when you look at the worst situations in Africa. Well, that's sort of where the majority of Burma's at. There's no money for national infrastructure. It's all been spent on the military traditionally.
But yet the people look quite healthy and seem, many of them, not all, but many of them very happy.
I think that's cultural. I mean, that's a cultural ability to deal with hardship in their own way, which is immensely worthy of respect. To think that their hardships don't hit them and that there isn't an awareness of the hardships that they endure, I think is a misinterpretation of as I agree, a smiling, happy nature.
So there has been political change in Burma, though. How's it affecting the people in the camp? Are they feeling hope or confidence that they might be able to go home, or are they not really trusting this change yet, like the rest of the Western world?
True and true and true. Yeah. Yes, there's hope. There's also fear. There's hope, there's cynicism, there's fear. There's fear of a very imminent repatriation process, which I think scares the refugees a lot for a number of reasons. Very briefly, landmine situation in Burma, no property rights for the refugees if they go back. Same military people in control of the towns and regions that were in control when the villages were being burnt and so on and so forth. So fear on that basis. Of sort of a hasty repatriation. Hope, obviously, because there is where Aung San Suu Kyi goes and speaks positively, and her having a public face. That's the focal point of hope, I think, in a Burmese context. So yes, fear, hope.
Because it's all well and good saying you're now allowed to go back to your homeland, there's been regime change, off you go. But if you don't have anywhere to go back to, the refugee camp is more home than anything.
Yeah, I think huge issue. But that's an issue in every repatriation of refugees from a refugee camp situation. And when you're dealing with one where these people have been in the refugee camps for up to sort of 3 decades, and then there are the refugees who were born into the camps, and those people who were born into the camps are now having their own set of children. Well, those ones just don't have anywhere to go back to, full stop. They've never been in Burma.
Good luck, Tim. And our next guest joining us shortly, the former editor of The Big Issue, Martin Hughes, has fallen in love with East...